Hi, it's nice to be back and in a different position and seeing the sector thriving so well. I'm invited to respond to the UK experience, which I have the opportunity to visit with the Council's team last year. I'm really impressed by Den and Lizzie's work. Well, to start the picture right, I like to copy what, the figures are not there. I'll read it. What Dan has put in about the UK sector. In Hong Kong, we have about 8,000 registered charitable organizations that got tax exemptions. We don't have a charities commission yet. Or will we have it? We don't know. But UK is 20 times more than us. We're talking about the social service related NGOs. We have 500 something. The council has 90% of them in their membership. So majority of the social service related charitable organizations are members of the council. The rest are schools, churches. So something about the employees of social service organizations. 1/5, if our working population is 3 million, about 1/5 of our population work in the NGO sector. So about the formal volunteers, which is missing there, I don't know why, we have 746,000. So if our number of NGOs are 20 times less than that, our number of volunteers is, UK is only 3 times more than us. So we have quite a lot of volunteers. Among them, those who are serving as board of NGOs, we have about a community of about 5,000 board of directors in the nonprofit sector. And what we're spending is about 23 billion Hong Kong dollars. Half of that comes from the government. Half of that comes from the community. So in terms of number of volunteers and in terms of the donations that we collected, the local charity sector get quite a lot of community support. Also the comparative figures about big, small, and medium-sized NGOs. These figures are the council's figures. The majority of our NGOs is also from the smallest sector from side of the sector. Those NGOs with less than 1.5 million annual recurrent budget, 5 million recurrent budget, that's $500,000 pounds. We have 50%, 230 out of 460 NGO members of the council. The medium-sized one is about 150. The big size or the huge ones are about 60-something. So it's skewed towards smaller NGOs and not having government funding. Dan talked about the temple of governance in UK. We also have our House of Corporate Governance. This is actually done by the Efficiency Unit. You can get the link from the Council's website. It's published by the Government Efficiency Unit in 2015. This is their second edition of this Guide to Corporate Governance for Subvented NGOs. In our House of Corporate Governance, which in a way it's similar, and the bottom of it, we have legal compliance, which everybody knows. That's a basic. And it's a bit different from the UK's Temple of Governance in terms it's identified as components and processes. Components means if you look at it, it's the structures and systems that should be in place for corporate governance from the perspective of government. And closest to legal compliance is a very important and second step is risk management. You can see it. Then it's corporate citizenship, code of conduct. But the point about stakeholders' relationship, it's important. Transparency, disclosure, strategic planning, and monitoring. Decision-making, oversight. Then further up is the structure of the board, the operation, effectiveness. They have descriptions on the structures and the systems that should be in place. There are 6 key processes of governance which the government expects NGOs to have. And my interest in the point called stewardship. By stewardship, it's not ownership. So, who owns a charity? And being corporate governance, you are steward of whom? Resources for whom? For UK, maybe you can tell us, it's the trusteeship. Is it the same? The top part, the outcome of corporate governance, it's confidence in the organization. Comparing the temple and our house. Looks a little bit the same. I have a few points of comparison which I think will be of interest that we can discuss later. Let's go from the bottom up. We have common foundation. It's outside is legal compliance, but on the UK's Temple of Governance, it's the trustees' duties and the organization context. This tells one point, it's that legal compliance, what do we see? We have, if you operate government services, you get government license, you have service compliance. You have to abide by the relevant ordinance. You have financial compliance. You have to have an external audit that every AGM you can hear the auditor that the organization has full compliance. But the difference is we don't have any governance benchmark standard compliance. In UK, you have the Charities Commission that prescribes 6 essential trustee duties. That may be the missing foundation here. The second part of comparison, it's the structure of the house. As said, we have structures, systems, processes, and components. For what Dan has explained, the UK temple, they start with not functional structures, but principles, values, before going into rationale for that, and then describing the outcome, and also some recommended practices. You can look up the website he has suggested. You can identify how it's approached. It's a bit different. And then you go up to the outcome of governance, the top of the temple and the top of the house. The top of the UK temple, it's the organization purpose. The test of the game is whether you have achieved the organization purpose. And for us, it's confidence in the organization. One looks a bit intrinsic and one looks about extrinsic things. Whether the community believes in you and you get your dollar for it. So, points of comparison and then some learning points. Dan mentioned leadership being one of the leading pillars. he mentioned the role of chair and leading by example, other than just roles, structures, and responsibilities. What is effective board leadership? What's the role of the CEO in supporting board leadership? We can discuss that. The second point is the emphasis on culture and behavior. Talk about diversity, openness, integrity. Then talk about creating a board culture. We heard Professor Gertner this morning talking about getting board on board, being engaged, rather than just having structures and processes. So, building an appropriate board culture, is it anything different from small NGOs and big NGOs? Diversity, Jen said it's lucky to be as one of the pillars. Diversity of opinions and skills in governance, not just friends. Is there a process? Are they supporting? We talked about, one of the NGOs shared that one NGO's advertised for recruiting board members. It's not a trend here, but we're moving along. But how to ensure we have the diversity of opinions and skills, representativeness. We talk about stakeholders' relationship, and it goes to the same thing about outward-facing role of board. In US, which Professor Gertner today mentioned, fundraising role of the board is very important. But other than fundraising, stakeholders' relationship, advocacy, are boards involved? And as I learned that the governance code is not just a code to be put on the wall. It's a continuous review and improvement process, a benchmark for NGOs to continue enhancement and development. It goes down to my final learning point, which I think can be points that we can open the discussion to the floor. I mean, as said, code of governance, it's not there to be put on the wall, but how to put it in use? What are the enablers, especially for small NGOs, to really use these codes? We talk about carrots and sticks. What are the incentives? Sticks, you have the big stick, the Charities Commission in UK. Can we move along without a stick? What are barriers? Is resources a barrier for smaller NGOs to go by the code? And I see that for the Charities Code in UK, you have different versions, actually. And how to help NGOs to overcome these barriers? Is it by creating a culture? Are there more difficulty or barriers because of a culture within the NGOs that are resistant to change? What can be the continuous motivating or pushing factor for continuous improvement? My learning, it's governance actually is a process. Alignment is a big thing. Alignment among board, alignment between board and executive, alignment between the organization and the needs of the society, mutual respect, and joint accountability. Thank you.